All right, welcome everyone. Great to have all of you joining us today. We are going to hang out for just a minute to make sure that everyone can join and get settled in. We have some amazing guests today, so be sure to grab a drink and a snack so that you don't miss a thing. I'm coming to you from Bozeman, Montana, where we are enjoying some unseasonably warm weather today and truly trying to take advantage of it. Shelby, how are you? What's the latest in Nevada?
I'm well, thank you, Amy. I am, yes, zooming in from the Reno Tahoe area. We are on the cusp of what might be some wintry weather, but so far pretty nice. So yeah, happy to be here.
Perfect, love to hear it. Travis, how about you? Remind me where you're at again.
I am in kind of west central Kentucky, about an hour north of Nashville, Tennessee.
And what's going on with your weather?
It's just kind of traditional fall here. So it's not near as cold as up north, especially in Bozeman, Montana.
I know it's terrible. You have to come back for a retreat in January, like the worst time in Bozeman. Probably the reason you left.
I'm
All
always
right.
crossing my fingers that it doesn't get below zero when we're there in January.
Yes.
Zero
Totally.
is like, okay, I can do that, but colder than that is really cold.
No, thank you. I love it. All right. Well, we are just past the hour, so I'm officially going to kick us off. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Arno, and I am the Field and Event Marketing Manager on the XYPN marketing team. Today, I am so glad to host this event, Mastering Your Compliance Program as an RIA Owner, with Shelby Brown, an XYPN Senior Compliance Consultant, and Travis Johnson, the Managing Director of XYPN Compliance. I do have just a few housekeeping items to go over. If you have any questions for us to address throughout the session, please be sure to submit those in the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of Zoom there, as that's just easier for me to monitor than the chat. We also have some questions that were submitted beforehand, so we will be answering a mix of both those and then questions that are asked live throughout our conversation. Also, when the webinar is over, you will be able to fill out a survey through Zoom, and we would love to hear how we did. We also want to hear ideas from you for topics that you would like to hear about in the future, so be thinking about that and please give us some suggestions. We do host a free webinar every month, so next month be sure to join us on December 13th for how to turn your year-end RIA review into next year's goals. And that will be with XYPN members Patrick King and Lyndon Cornett. This will be a great webinar to get ready to crush your year in 2024, so we hope to see you there. All right, enough with the boring stuff. Let's get to the reason you all are here. Let's do some quick introductions, and then we will get into the presentation. Travis, can you tell us a bit about your experience with compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So for many of you that do not know me, as Amy mentioned, so I help lead the compliance team at XYPN. I've been with XYPN now for 7.5 years, I think. So throughout most of the growth. Prior to that, I was with an RIA that I kind of handled a lot of the portfolio management, operations, and inevitably compliance, helping get advisors registered from numerous states under our RIA and transition to SEC registration. So that was kind of the start of my compliance career back in the day. And then with XYPN, just as the network has grown, helping support advisors through state and SEC registration, audits, transitions with amongst their firms, and just trying to help advisors understand the practical application of all of the rules. It's really kind of been where I've kind of focused all of my energy in trying to develop that expertise and support the team in doing so as well.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you. All right, Shelby, it's your turn. What's your experience with compliance?
I've been doing investment advisor compliance for almost a decade now, and I'm almost 5 years at XYPN. Previously, I worked for a large RIA, so got into the mechanics of compliance and actually doing the things and learning kind of on the job. So that was a great experience to come into a consulting role with. Consulting, though, is my sweet spot. I love just working with lots of different firms who all have different things going on, helping with audits in lots of different places, and just learning kind of how to manage the state regulations along with the SEC regulations.
Great, thank you. I know we have some great content, so I'm going to turn it over to the both of you and go off camera for a minute, and I will be back to moderate questions at the end of the session. All right, Travis, take it away.
Absolutely. Give me a second here to pull this up. I will. All right. So what Shelby and I are going to go through today is, give you, as much detail as we can in the time that we have on the call. We want to leave plenty of time for questions, as Amy mentioned earlier, but really giving some insight into what it takes really managing a compliance program, some background to the rule that governs this both at the SEC level and really influences state regulation, some of the key points in developing your compliance program, reviewing it on an ongoing basis, and some of the starting points on actually digging into those activities. So what we'll start with really is, and then after all this, we'll go into some of those questions that have been pre-submitted and some of the ones that come up through this. I think there'll be some of the stuff we cover in the slides. I think we'll cover a lot of the questions that tend to come up. So to really kick things off, before we get into this, we really need to understand a little bit about what the regulation is governing your compliance program. So why do you need to have policies and procedures in place as a registered investment advisor, and what are they intended to solve for? So that's really where the compliance program rule comes into play, part of the Investment Advisors Act, the SEC Rule 20647. So there's three things that it spells out. Obviously, and for the benefit of many of you, we won't dig in specifically to the regulation. I know that will create for a pretty dry webinar, but the key points are that you're required to designate a chief compliance officer, someone who's accountable for the firm's compliance program, the development, implementation, and maintenance of policies and procedures, that holds all of the representatives accountable for their role in ensuring the firm is compliant. For a couple of different reasons. One, just making sure that there's no negligence or kind of misconduct that would put the firm at risk, put the clients at risk, their assets or information at risk. Someone needs to be accountable for that. For many of you, if you're going to be a solo advisor for a period of time, or maybe just 1 to 2 advisors, the chief compliance officer is likely going to be wearing multiple hats. It might be the principal of the firm, the main advisor. For a solo advisor, you're wearing all of the hats. So that chief compliance officer inevitably has to be one of them. What that accountability comes with is the need to establish policies and procedures that are what we have on here, reasonably designed to detect, prevent, and correct violations of the Advisors Act. All of the rules they're under. For those many of you that are likely going to be state registered to begin with, this regulation is fairly uniform across jurisdictions. The practical application of it may change a little bit from state to state, but it all kind of funnels back to the compliance program rule. So the overarching theme is policies and procedures that need to be in place, tailored for the firm, that avoid and allow for identification or detection of violations of the regulations you're subject to. Once you have that in place for your firm, which is an area we help with a lot, you need to ensure that you're reviewing those policies and procedures no less than annually. And then beyond that, just as the firm's operations and just the dynamics change, whether that's the addition of another advisor, if you're moving from a solo advisor firm to now being a multi-advisor firm where there's this element of supervision that now you need to supervise another person who's delivering advisory services to clients. That's usually kind of a pivotal point for many firms who may be operating for a few years as a solo advisor, but now are bringing on maybe they brought on a paraplanner who's now taking more of a junior advisor role, or you partner with another advisor. It sort of shifts the compliance program dynamics a bit. You can still make it manageable. You can still kind of minimize the burden of compliance and oversight with some thoughtful kind of reviews of those policies and procedures, which we'll get into as much as we can on that today. To go from there, Shelby's going to talk a little bit about kind of what it means to establish the written policies and procedures and what the core areas of the rule want you to focus on. Shelby.
Yeah, so the neat thing about RIA compliance is that you really have a lot of freedom to create your own policies and procedures. And so on the screen here where we say, at a minimum, you should address these practices to the extent they apply to your firm. If you don't manage assets, you're going to have different policies and procedures than a firm that does. So your policies and procedures need to be tailored to the firm's business practices. There are certain areas where you may not need a policy just because it's not part of your business. So the regulation surrounding this requirement that Travis just talked about is intentionally principles based rather than prescriptive. So they don't tell us specific policies and procedures that we need to have just because every firm is different. So they want to make sure that you are designing the policies for your firm, and that you're able to adhere to the policies and procedures to remain compliant. So the SEC does publish risk alerts periodically. They've been quite frequent in 2023, but they can be really helpful to just review like the pulse of the industry, what the regulators are looking at in certain areas of your practice, where they see firms falling short, what common deficiencies they see out of audits, and then what measures they've seen that have been effective in not only establishing your policies and procedures, but making sure they're implemented effectively. So on the screen here, I won't read through them, but these are just very common areas that you should have pretty robust policies and procedures on if this is part of your business.
Yeah. Thanks, Shelby. Yeah, absolutely. This really covers these 10 areas, or what the Advisors Act rule of the compliance program rule kind of spells out as being the baseline, if you will, for kind of establishing your compliance program. Like we have on here, to the extent they apply for your firm. So when you're establishing those, for those that are looking to start a firm, you haven't done it yet, whether you're working with XYPN or another consulting firm to kind of help you with this, they'll give you sort of a starting point for all of these things, and then have to work with you to determine, okay, what's relevant, to what extent do we need to have supervision policies that tie to all of these things. But these give you kind of the starting point. Shelby mentioned the risk alerts. It's always a great way to, while you don't have to read every single one of them that comes out at the SEC level or the state equivalent of those, most states aren't as common or aren't as frequent in their publishing of these. It does help you. It's the easiest way to stay up to date on what the focus of regulators are, without having to become an expert in all of the regulation.
Yeah, I think what you see on your screen here in these areas is probably what a pretty common table of contents might tend to look like for a set of written policies and procedures. Of course, there are some subsections to each of these, but these are the main areas.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So where to start in establishing a compliance program? It's a common question we get from many advisors is, we have a lot of these documents, but where do we start in actually either reviewing this or tailoring this for my firm? This is where, depending on your background, some of you might have some familiarity with at least the terms or maybe the process for doing this, but conducting a firm-wide risk assessment. If you do a search on, investment advisor risk assessments online, you'll see a lot of practices and solutions that are kind of explain what this is for, but it's what is a suggested practice for reviewing your firm's operations, your systems, operations, practices, the types of clients you work with, the services you provide, how you're billed for, or how you're billing for those services, to assess the risk and need for certain policies and procedures and disclosures even around all of these elements of your firm, to, again, going back to our original slide, prevent violations of the act, and then also ensure that the firm and its reps are safeguarding client data. Data security is becoming, really a primary focus, one of the primary focuses of the SEC and just about every state, to ensure that clients' data is being protected for obvious reasons. This can take a number of different forms, but many, from a cybersecurity, data security perspective, sort of a common sense approach to data security can, address, 80 to 90% of the risks and the breaches that do occur. What phishing scams, for those that are familiar with that, not accessing sensitive information on a public network using a VPN, basic password protection, and kind of ensuring that you're using up-to-date security measures on your devices and the systems you use to access client information. Those are some of the things that really start to flow out of this. So conducting that firm-wide risk assessment is really going to give you some tools to conduct this initial review and determine, okay, where are the areas of risk within my firm that require some sort of additional measures to be in place, or at least verifying that you have adequate measures in place, especially from the data security perspective. Shelby, any additional points around what you would recommend for getting started on a risk assessment?
No, I think this is good what you have so far. I think it is important to emphasize the data security and cybersecurity component. We mentioned the risk alerts that the SEC puts out so that we kind of know what they're monitoring and what they're looking at, what they're interested in seeing in your policies and procedures. And one of those risk alerts each year are their exam priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. And I think cybersecurity appeared for the first time on the exam priorities maybe in like 2017 or 16, and it has not been removed since then. So it's going to continue to be a hot topic for the industry. And so, just keeping a pulse of what's important to them and making that important to you as far as the riskier sides of your business is important. That's what the risk assessment will help with, just help you prioritize all the different risky areas and let you attend to the more risky areas first.
Yeah. And within XYPN, this is an area that our compliance team is pretty constantly focused on developing more resources around to help give you specific actionable tools to conduct these reviews, document the key risks in a way that you can sort of, rank the risks from highest to lowest. Where's the sensitive information? What do we need to get solved immediately? What policies need to be expanded? And that's something that we'll continue to have a focus on in the coming years around just making it easier for you to do these practices initially, conduct these reviews, and adopt practical compliance policies that help you stay on track with this stuff.
Yeah, good. I think we can now move on to, talking about the risk assessment. We mentioned that's a highly suggested practice. We would recommend that all firms do that, even though this is an SEC rule, of course. And the rule we mentioned doesn't, specifically mention the risk assessment being a requirement, but it's a good starting place so that you can design an annual review practice that works for your firm, kind of based on what you find out of the risk assessment. So the purpose of the annual review is, of course, to make sure that you're following the rule and that your policies and procedures are not only drafted and on paper, but have been effectively implemented, that you're doing what you say, saying what you do. So what you have on paper matches what you're doing in practice. So during the annual review, you review your policies that you have on paper, make sure you are looking at any compliance issues or violation events that have happened throughout the previous year. If you've been audited, making sure that any deficiencies expressed during the audit have been addressed. And if there is any recent rulemaking or new policies or regulations that would indicate a change to your policies and procedures, that you're addressing that as well. So I think we can hit the next slide, Travis. The SEC recently actually updated the compliance program rule that we led this session with. And what they added was the requirement to document the annual review in writing. It was kind of implied before, but now they've explicitly put that requirement down. So the rule doesn't specify a format for the documentation, which in this case is actually kind of nice because it's so easy to get, I think, carried away as a small firm and be doing a little bit too much and kind of dive into the overkill realm of things. So they want us to create a process that fits the size of the firm, fits the firm's business practices. They want everyone to know they put a press release out about this new update to the rule, and want to highlight that you do have flexibility in how you record the results of your annual review, and it just needs to fit your business. So it can be charts and spreadsheets, it can be Word or Google Docs. It can be a combination of those things. It can even be quarterly reviews that are documented on a more frequent basis that get kind of compiled into the documentation for your annual review. So this doesn't need to be one time of year just doing everything all at once, like take, set a few days aside for compliance. If you, review things throughout the year, you can use those intermittent reviews as part of your documentation for your annual review. So you'll be documenting, which policies and procedures you have reviewed and any changes that you've made, or if you didn't need to make changes as well. So things that could trigger changes are, again, significant changes made to your business practices. If you add or remove a service offering or something that may trigger an edit to your policies and procedures. Again, what comes out of your risk assessment, and then of course, new or amended rules and regulations.
Yeah. Thanks, Shelby, on that. A quick note on this. I actually did publish a blog post in the XYPN blog here just in the last month discussing this requirement, the annual review and documentation thereof. So if you're subscribed to our XYPN emails or kind of the blog alerts, or you just navigate to our XYPN website and the advisor facing blogs, you should see it on there. It's fairly recent. If you want to learn a little bit more about that process and the requirement.
Yeah, and when I see a question in the chat that is related to, or in the Q&A that's related to this, about how often would you update the date of review on your policies and procedures as they're written. So they should be updated at least annually. But if you make changes, intra-year, it's important to document the changes that were made, and then you can redate it at that time. So even if you don't make changes and it's been since your last annual review, since you have redated the document, I suggest that you note that you reviewed it, no changes were made, and then redate it, because that's the last review date.
Yeah. Some firms have found it helpful, and this will be a segue into this slide. Some firms have found it helpful to kind of have an audit log of just like the self-audit log at the end of their policies and procedures for those that have worked with large, mid to large companies or enterprises, and you have like company policies and procedures or company handbooks. Generally, HR might have an audit log, a change log that shows, on these dates, these policies were changed. Here's a brief description of the change. That can be a good practice, especially if you have multiple team members that, at specific intervals, usually, maybe in the form of an annual compliance meeting that we'll have Shelby discuss here in a second, you can go through and discuss the changes that have basically the compliance issues that were identified throughout the year, the changes that occurred, and the expectation moving forward to ensure compliance.
Yeah, it's similar to the material changes page of your ADV Part 2. Honestly, it's just a way to highlight the important things that have changed in the document. So as if you were to provide that to an auditor as either evidence of your annual review or just, the current version of your policy and procedure document, they're able to sort through and see when the reviews happened, what changes were made. So it's not good just for you, like Travis said, but it's good for regulators to show them. And then, as we have on the screen here, to inform your staff. So if you're not a solo firm, we suggest an annual compliance meeting where the CCO can just feed information to the rest of the staff who isn't working in compliance on the day-to-day. You're being compliant, but you're not monitoring compliance and supervising the program. So an annual meeting is a great way for the CCO to either describe or show the documentation from the annual review, let the staff know what things were found or if everything is going well. It's also a really great opportunity for the staff to ask the compliance team questions. We have it built into our compliance manual template, but that no one's going to get in trouble for asking questions. I'm doing something, I'm not sure if it's compliant. Can we talk about it and just make sure that I'm doing things that are in line with the policies and procedures? That's a great conversation to have. There are no stupid questions, especially in compliance. And sometimes the only way that the CCO is aware of something being out of compliance, even slightly, is if someone brings it to their attention. So there are certain things that happen that they may not catch in their testing and their reviews. So it's helpful to have a conversation about it, just an open, casual conversation about it. It's also okay as the CCO in these settings, if you don't have all the answers. That's understandable, that's fine. talk with your consultant, table it, get back to your team if it's a valuable piece of information that you need to feed them after the meeting. So take attendance of who's in the meeting, record it. If anyone can't make it, they can digest it later on their own time. And ultimately that part's important because your staff does on an annual basis attest to following the policies and procedures. And so we just need to remind them that they exist, where they are, that they can see them at any time and ask questions before they're comfortable probably, signing and certifying that they will follow those policies.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby. A quick note on this too. I mean, really, when it comes down to getting examined by a state regulator or the SEC, the role some of these things place, while it might seem like just kind of an administrative burden to do some of this stuff, it's a matter of really figuring out, the practical application of it based on the dynamics of your firm. Compliance, especially for solo advisors that don't have a huge need for supervision, a lot of this can be kept pretty minimal and just and kind of just thinking through some strategic processes to minimize that administrative or operational burden of compliance management and supervision. For those that do need to conduct annual compliance meetings, it's also a big part of what the SEC and states are going to look at in terms of ensuring that the firm has a culture of compliance. You'll hear that tossed around quite a bit. Just that's part of just the CCO's kind of overarching accountability is to build and maintain a culture of compliance within the firm that ensures a continued adoption of the policies and procedures, and really prevents those violations and any issues coming up. So the annual compliance meeting, when done effectively, can help maintain that buy-in from the rest of your team, especially for those that will have a team of advisors or kind of supervised persons under the firm subject to the rules. Just providing that opportunity to make sure everyone understands it. Doesn't need to be a full day event in many cases, be a couple hours, few hours, just to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, discuss the findings, how they occurred, how they were resolved, and what you expect going forward. All of these things are stuff that can help too within XYPN as well.
Yeah, and I think it's going to increase people's comfortability with compliance who are not part of the compliance team. I think a lot of times there's this stigma that compliance is scary and difficult, but it's with a little work up front and some time and communication, that can go away. I was at a compliance conference last week getting some continuing education, and they said something that really resonated with me, which is that bad compliance is contagious, but good compliance is also contagious. And so setting that tone from the top, from the CCO down, of just good compliance, it's going to flow throughout the firm just naturally.
Yeah. A couple quick questions I want to answer here on the Q&A that are related to what was discussed on this slide in the last from Michael. Defining documentation in the folder electronic. Documenting your compliance program can be done usually all electronically, unless you just operate better and want in a kind of keep maintaining that stuff on a paper format or physical folder structure. But generally, online documentation, either in the form of kind of what Shelby mentioned, periodic memos of the stuff that's been reviewed, or a collection of notes that are summarized at the end of the year around the specific findings and takeaways from that review. I think the blog post that I published not long ago kind of gets in a little bit more into some of the specific ways that you can document this and points to some resources around that. The compliance logs,
all virtual is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The compliance logs, in terms of like logging either reviews or specific client events, we see that in a number of different ways. Generally, you can have this could be like a spreadsheet where you kind of have tabbed for different reviews. So trading reviews, client complaint logs, trade error logs, a collection of those, or it could be a folder where you generally just put a memo anytime there's a compliance or event in those areas. A trade error documentation of the identification, the belief for, how did the error occur? How is it addressed? How did you make the client whole? And just having a folder structure that allows for processes to be put into place to input those internal memos as those events occur. Other things where you're just logging reviews could be done as part of your task management system. Some advisors use like Wealthbox and build the workflows out that in there to manage it. At XYPN, you get access to Smart RIA's compliance task management system that can be tailored for your firm. Through the completion of some of those tasks, they can also serve as a bit of a log as well. So some different options there, but we have some resources to help for that. You can usually keep it pretty simple.
Yeah, and again, the cool thing or the luxury about being, the CCO is you create something that works for you, something that is efficient and somewhat easy. And by easy, I mean something you can be consistent with over time. We don't want to be creating processes that are so burdensome that you're just not going to stay accountable. So,
yeah. So we've kind of, I know, given a high level overview of some of these, the development and review of your compliance program, compliance policies and procedures specifically, the need for an annual review and conducting a compliance meeting. But, what things to think through as you're reviewing or developing these things based on the current regulatory environment. Some of the things that Shelby and I would usually discuss are based on the last 1 to 2 years of just the ever evolving focus of the SEC, new and proposed regulation. These are just a list of things that come to mind. For those of you that have been in a firm that has had, changing regulation, or where you've stayed up to date on some of the recent regulation, the SEC marketing rule comes to mind. For those that aren't aware, the SEC updated their marketing rule to allow for the use of testimonials and endorsements in certain cases, as long as some certain compliance requirements are met. This is at the SEC level. Keep that in mind for those of you that are thinking about registering at the state level. A number of states, however, do align with the SEC marketing rule and would allow this. We have some resources in our network that are available to members to kind of help you determine whether or not you are in a jurisdiction that allows for it, and in what the requirements are, sort of a map, if you will. But making sure that your policies and procedures allow for, or one, if you're subject to the SEC marketing rule, have you updated policies and procedures to ensure that you're going to be in full compliance with it? The SEC, now that it's in full implementation, is certainly looking at these during every exam. There's a ton of, quite a few enforcement actions that have brought out for certain types of firms that have not been in compliance with this. There's been a couple of risk alerts and just a discussion overall on the need to ensure up-to-date policies and procedures to comply with this new rule. They're no longer allowing firms, since it's out of the transition period of the new rule, to rely on the prior version of the rule. There's other aspects of this beyond these testimonials. There's been some significant changes to performance advertising. If you create your own asset allocation models or advertise your investment performance or projected investment performance, there's some very specific requirements around handling that. So making sure that those policies are in place and up to date. We've already talked about documenting your annual review of your compliance program, specifically if you're SEC registered. Like Shelby and I kind of mentioned, this is a best practice we suggest for every advisor, though, is having the documentation of that. You'll get the sentiment from quite a few regulators that if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. So it could be simple documentation. If you just think about the delivery of your services, when you're working with a client, how you demonstrate that you're earning your fee or providing the services, that could be as simple as documenting the delivery of services after client meetings or after a deliverable, just in the client notes in your CRM. Stuff like that can be perfectly sufficient. Portfolio management practices. Oh, go ahead, Shelby.
I was just going to mention a little bit of the timing for I mentioned they updated the rule to include the layer of the written documentation of your annual review. That became effective on Monday this week. So this is good timing for this. And so any annual review that's done after Monday this week should be documented. Any annual review that you've done within the past 12 months that was before the effective date of that rule amendment does not necessarily need to be documented as part of the rule, because it happened before the effective date. But we've been documenting our annual reviews for consulting clients for years, I think, just because it felt like the right thing to do. So just a little note on the date of compliance there for SEC registered firms.
For those that aren't registered yet, going into the next year, though, especially if you're going to be SEC registered, absolutely make sure that that you have a process in place to document those reviews. And the annual review of your compliance program, specifically reviewing your compliance policies and procedures, practices, documenting that. For those at the state level, again, it's something we're always going to recommend. it varies from state to state significantly on the expectations of the regulators in those jurisdictions. One of the things I feel is pretty uniform, though, is documentation is key in just about anything compliance related, to ensure that they get a sense during an examination that you are, taking an active role in maintaining your compliance program. Doesn't mean you have to be doing a ton of work every month or even every quarter in some cases, but that the work that you are doing to maintain your compliance program is in some manner documented, or you're able to show, record, or demonstrate what you have been doing. A couple of the other things on here, portfolio management practices, including changes to custodians. Like when you look at your policies and procedures, for those that on the call that might already be registered, reviewing your portfolio management practices, throughout the year, at least annually. For those that that transition from TD Ameritrade to Schwab as part of that long-going but recent merger, or recent acquisition, is if you had policies and procedures previously that spelled out specifically how your portfolio management practices tied into TD Ameritrade, needing to make sure that those are updated to reflect any changes to those practices now that you're under another custodian. Any changes to your disclosures in your ADV and other documents that reference custodians or different practices. If you, if you started taking on direct custody of client assets, there is a list of changes that would probably need to be made there. Same could be said with discretionary trading authority or changes in your investment strategies. You generally would have policies or disclosures in place that indicate what you the scope of or the nature of your investment management for clients. And you want to make sure that those disclosures and policies are always up to date. The accuracy of fee calculations is one I want to touch on a little bit here, and Shelby and I might have some discussion points on. There's been quite a few risk alerts in the last year, maybe even a couple of years from the SEC. States have echoed the same view as well, around ensuring advisors are accurately billing fees, and basically that the client has the ability to reconcile fees independently. So for advisory fees billed directly out of a custodial account, at the state level, in many states, you're required to send invoices. The SEC doesn't currently require invoices, so there's a little bit of a difference there. Regardless of the invoicing practices, though, it's been a common theme of just inaccurate fee calculations. This could be for a number of different reasons. Either your disclosures say you're going to bill fees or calculate fees one way, and in practice or through the change of custodians or certain just operational changes, you've changed those practices. What might seem like a minor change, if it does end up being inconsistent with your disclosures, regulators are going to require corrective action there. Could be in the form of client notices, refunding of fees if the clients were overbilled. The other common issue we see here is where advisors are unexecuted client agreements, where either the advisor or the client didn't fully execute their side of the agreement. Generally most contracts, advisory contracts we see, if one party didn't sign it, it's not executed, meaning you can't bill the client. So we've seen this in cases where advisors had a number of unexecuted agreements and they were billing the client for a couple of years. They got audited and it was discovered that the agreements weren't fully executed. Fortunately, the state, at least the cases we've seen, the states were understanding and gave some options there that ultimately just resulted in the clients needing to get the advisor needing to get those agreements executed, sending some notices to clients, and not needing to actually refund those fees as long as those notifications were delivered.
Yeah, they got a little bit lucky, I think, because this is one of the areas that can cost the firm money out of an audit if they notice a billing mistake. Like they said, you would be required to make a client whole if you made a billing miscalculation. So this is one of the more important areas to ensure that is consistently being done correctly and that you're not just perpetuating silly mistakes.
Yeah. Invoicing practices too. This is one that gets missed by quite a few advisors. Invoicing requirements in those states that require invoices, and for those that pursue registration down the road, and if you're a member of XYPN, we can help you navigate this. It's generally, most states are going to require invoices. There are a number of states that don't. We try to maintain a list of those, and it doesn't change that often, but has changed in the past. We have, a fairly up-to-date list of states that, in our current experiences or based on their recent regulation or current regulation, that do not require it. But invoicing is separate than the statements that they receive from their custodian. The intent by most of those states that require it is an informational invoice provided to the client is intended to give the client the ability to reconcile the fees. What did they agree to in the client agreement when they became a client, their discussions with you there? What was kind of the final fee arrangement? What was debited from their account? If this is for financial planning and you're using advice pay, like what was the subscription set up for, or any other fee that was debited there, or the custodial account, what got debited from their account? And then concurrent with that, what was the invoice you sent that was the intended fee to be billed? But those three things need to align. Most advisors will get questions about, can I negotiate my fees? As long as you have disclosures in place that say you can negotiate, that the fees are negotiable, you can have a fee arrangement that you negotiate down to a lower fee. That needs to be documented in the client agreement, and your invoices need to be consistent with that, both in the amount and the nature in which the fee is billed. We can get into that if there's questions later on as well.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into the next bullet point, which is actually maybe the most important. Maybe we should have put this one on the top, but having consistency whenever things appear in multiple places, whether it's client facing or internal, being your policies and procedures. Like whenever we talk about something in multiple places, we need to be consistent. That's one of the things that they're eyeing the most when they come in to examine you, is to make sure not only what's on paper is actually happening in practice, but when it's in multiple places, it appears not exactly the same, but consistent. So that's important also as it comes to billing practices and fee calculation.
Absolutely. Yeah, ensuring consistency across all documents and advertising material, 100%.
Yeah.
Another recent one here is the investment advisor representative continuing education requirements. This has been a bit of a change for a lot of advisors in the recent year. There are a number of states adopting continuing education requirements for investment advisor reps. Some of you are probably already familiar with this if you've been registered at another firm and are in a state that does require it. There's a growing list of states that are requiring this. Shelby, I don't know if you know offhand what the amount of them is. I don't know if it's like a dozen states now or over.
I'm not sure the exact number, but I can put into the chat here a link to NASA's map that shows which states have adopted this, which states are planning to adopt this starting in 2024. Another really good resource near this at the same link is the FAQ page that NASA has on the IACCP requirements. That'll tell you about the timing and reporting and where to get the education and if it can count for your CFP, CE as well, for example. So NASA is really the best resource when it comes to the IACCP requirements, but it's something that we want to make sure that if it does apply to you, where your individuals are registered, that you're making plans to get that education and get it reported on time, so that just to avoid deficiencies with registrations.
Yeah. For those that follow Michael Kitces, the kitces.com website as well, I know Kitces has quite a few resources around this as well and a whole collection of continuing education that qualifies for IAR CE. And I think it even notes the dual CE, which sessions or content that allows you to sort of, kill two birds with one stone there, getting your CFP, CFA, or some other professional learning credits, as well as your IARC. So that's something to look at.
Yeah.
I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions here. So one of the last couple things here is really, we won't spend too much time on the ESG stuff here, but it's really just it goes, the same could be said for any other practice you have, is if you say you specialize in a certain area or your investment strategies are focused on a specific type of investing, ESG or social or SRI investing, and that's something you advertise, it's something you claim to focus on as a primary strategy, you need to ensure that your disclosures advertising, and actual practices are all aligned. The SEC has really cracked down on this for firms that claim to be, primarily focused on ESG investing or have their main strategies with this as a consideration. There's just been a number of cases where the way that has been communicated is not consistent with the actual practices that have been put into place. So it's just they just consider consider a misleading practice. Something we can definitely cover down the road.
Yeah, and then I think a good lead-in question time would be this last bullet on the slide here, which is about making sure that you have and follow compliance calendar. Kitsis just recently put out a blog post about crafting an annual compliance calendar that works for your firm, specifically solo or small RIAs, because I think it can be a challenge, like I said, to kind of do enough but not too much. So creating a compliance calendar either on your own or using a tool like Smart RIA that we mentioned earlier is a great way to just keep yourself accountable and on track and remind yourself what needs to be done throughout the year.
Yeah. As Shelby mentioned, I think earlier too, I think Amy had mentioned this as well, a couple of formats here, but some of these resources I think we've mentioned in kind of just broadly, but you'll have access to this after the webinar. There'll be this recording and webinar will be posted online, but these are some resources as you're starting to dig into developing or reviewing your compliance program, some recent and relevant resources that would help in these areas. I do want to make sure that we get to some of these questions. Amy, is there anything that you need before we start digging into some of these questions?
No, I was just going to mention with this slide, we do always post like a blog recap on the XYPN blog of these conversations. So we'll be sure to include all of these links in that blog. So if you want to have an easy to go to guide for what we've talked about today, look out for that probably in a couple weeks. So yeah, let's hop into some questions. I think we've just got a few that were asked live to wrap up if we want to jump into those real quick. So we do have a question of, you're saying annual reviews as in meetings with clients. So I guess we want to clarify the annual review, is that like with individuals or for the firm? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so I can touch on this just briefly for both, really. And it's kind of one of there's a way we can address this as being one and the same. So one, what we were talking about was annual review of your compliance program. So the requirement is to review your compliance policies and procedures and the other documents therein, code of ethics, data security, on an annual basis and as needed beyond that. The documentation of your annual meeting with clients is still 100% going to be a suggested practice. That's going to be part of documenting the delivery of your services. Regardless of your arrangement, whether it's financial planning or investment management, investment advice only, most regulators are expecting that you're meeting with the client at least annually to review their arrangements, provide suggestions, make sure information is up to date that you're using to form the basis of your planning and investment recommendations. So sort of kind of two answers there, but what we were talking about is mainly the annual review of your compliance program in terms of the delivery of your services. One of those practices or policies could be documenting your annual review with clients.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I am getting ready to start the process of registering my firm as a new business. Would working with XYPN's compliance group help you establish the annual review process initially?
We have a few different options for initial registration, ranging from kind of a more DIY solution where, we're going to support you through critical parts of the process, but give you the resources to sort of lead the process and handle it kind of on your own in terms of the preparation and support. And then we'll jump in and help with a couple of critical elements there where advisors need the most support. We have our enhanced registration where we sort of take the lead with that and help you customize everything, submit the complete application, and provide more hands-on support throughout the rest of the process. That's to get you registered and then provide all of the policies, procedures, and documents you need to get launched and sort of develop your compliance program thereafter. Our first year compliance foundations are kind of our additional tier of compliance support there. We'll support you through the first 12 months of your compliance program after you've from the time that you're preparing registration to getting through that first year in business or upon launching and the rest of the year in business. Developing and implementing your compliance program, which is part of that, will include toward the end of that reviewing, making sure that you're comfortable with and have processes in place to review your compliance program and sort of what to look for there.
Yeah.
Perfect. That sounds great. Okay, then do you have any guides for enterprise firms that are looking to be SEC registered? So do we have any free ones, and then do we have any behind membership? Maybe answer it both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things here. One, we can support state or SEC registration within XYPN. We have a number of resources that are relevant to both state and SEC registered firms. For an enterprise firm, let's looking, if you're at another firm, you're looking to break away, start your own, that's going to be SEC registered. I think many of our resources will apply. You're just kind of looking at having to keep in mind that anything that is referring to stuff like invoices or some specific practices that mention variability from state to state may not apply at the SEC level. But most of our registration guides and other resources related to starting a firm are going to apply for those that are looking at registering with the SEC. Registration with the SEC, if you qualify for it, is actually pretty straightforward. It's sort of a double-edged sword, if you will. It's very easy to get registered with the SEC. If you fill out the information correctly, draft your ADV, get everything submitted, like they're not going to go through a thorough back and forth to make sure that everything is 100% aligned like most of the states will. They want to know basically, if was everything submitted correctly based on, is everything aligned? They're probably not going to review your ADV, your firm brochure that gets provided to clients thoroughly, but they will make sure that, they might reach out if there's certain boxes checked in the ADV part 1, such as maintaining custody or having broker-dealer affiliations, anything that indicates a higher level of risk. Otherwise, basically it's preparing the application, at least the application processes, preparing the documents, submitting the application, and then roughly about a month later, you can expect an approval. Depending on your situation, you'll have Form U4s to register the individuals under the firm before the firm becomes registered. We could get into that in a little bit deeper detail. I don't quite have the time on this call, but we could have follow-up conversations, address that in the future.
Yeah, and the reason the registration process is more abbreviated with the SEC is because they have an initiative where they go in and examine newly registered firms pretty soon after you become registered with the SEC. Pretty soon really means like within the first year, 18 months. We've seen it within the first 6 months for some firms. So kind of depends on their workload and which regional office you're dealing with. But the real more heavy review comes through the first audit, and that's because they do it soon so that you don't get set down a path that is unfavorable to what they want for too long. So we actually as consultants, like the sooner the better for that first audit, so that we can really get their eyes on everything and make sure everything is as they want to see it going forward. And then it can be a handful of years after that in between each audit, depending on how that first one goes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, while we're on SEC registration, I've got a question with a lot of letters in it. So here we go. For IACCP requirements, if SEC registered RIA and notice filed in various states, and one of the states notice filed in, not the one RIA is registered in, requires CE requirements, is the SEC registered RIA advisor required to comply?
I'll take this one. So no, so it's where the IAR, where the individuals are registered is what pulls in the IARC requirements. So IARs of federally registered RIAs are still registered at the state level. And so if you are an SEC registered RIA who has an IAR registered in a jurisdiction that requires the CE, that's what it's hooked to, not where the firm is registered notice filed, but where the individual is registered.
Okay, got it.
Excellent.
I think I got it. Okay, let's see. I'm unclear on what compliance services are included in XYPN membership versus add-on services. Trying to gauge the value of membership.
Yeah, so this
the link they posted is a good resource for you when we're offline, just about the page about the compliance benefits in the network. But like high level overview included is your annual ADV update filing, access to a bunch of resources, guides, templates through our Academy platform that you can use on your own to DIY things. And then I host an office hours session, which is kind of similar to this. It's just an AMA or open Q&A, really anything compliance related, twice a week. So that's included as a member benefit. If you just have one-off compliance questions and you don't feel like you need or want to shell out time or money for one-on-one time, you can come in a group-based setting and get those questions answered too. So, and any more on that you want to highlight, Travis, as far as just what's included?
No, so I mean, really, there's a few buckets. It's like what Shelby mentioned, the annual ADV updates, that will do for you. There's an option for just the required annual ADV updates. That's included in membership. We'll give you a detailed questionnaire to gather the information we need to make those updates. You'll work with a team member to review the information we've updated, and then we'll submit it for you. For those that need additional support with other changes, we have our premium ADV update service beyond that, along with our other hourly compliance services. They have like Shelby's office hours. Once you're registered, we do have initial registration. For those going through our initial registration process, there's some other calls there as well to prepare for and work through. And then, but an ongoing basis, once you have a registered firm, the existing firm office hours, periodic webinars as well. We have our XYPN Academy contains a growing number of member resources, DIY guides, support with, instructional guides on updating documents, submitting filings, templates, and a lot of that we maintain over time. Then beyond that, go ahead, Shelby.
I was just going to say that our not included services, which means they just come at a premium. So you pay a little extra for one-on-one time with a consultant like myself, but only members have access to those premium services. And so we don't provide our consulting to non-members. And so while it's not an included benefit per se, you only have the ability to pay for the extra services if you are a member. So,
and
you
Smart RIA is included.
Sorry.
Smart RIA is included for XYPN members. So if you're a multi-member firm, each of those members have access to that. There's an additional monthly fee, around $12 to $14 a month for additional users if you have, maybe for an enterprise size firm that has non-member users that need to have access.
And that's
and discussion forums too, I think, which is worth mentioning. Sometimes, we are not advisors, so we can recommend things to you all day, but we are not actually doing it. And so your best resource really is each other, and being able to bounce things off of each other on forums about how audits have gone for you, what you can expect to see in registration processes in different, maybe more difficult jurisdictions. That's an included member benefit that can be really helpful, I think, for people just kind of trying to find their way and see what's worked for others.
Great, thank you. So we're almost to the end. So I just want to have each of you end of like, if there's one big mistake that you see being made all the time that you just want to impart on people of like, if you're going to do one thing to walk away with today, like, please do this one thing. Travis, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I would say making sure you prioritize compliance early on. We work with, I think Shelby will echo this, but we work with a number of advisors that, whether, for those that are even consistently registered, usually what comes, or already registered, what usually comes up, or for those that become registered down the road, the first thing a lot of advisors do is they put compliance on the back burner. They say, I'll get to this, I'll get some clients in the door, then I'll get back to this. Usually, they end up, coming to us 2 years later and not, and, really haven't picked up the pieces of compliance since becoming registered. So, ultimately, while it's not, it's never really a fun process to do, you kind of have to look at it as a necessary administrative part of your business, putting those processes into place. It's never going to get easier than when you're just starting the business, or really at any point in time now. I mean, if for those of you that are focused on, whether you're already registered or going to become registered, but growing your firm, the bigger you get, unless you're hiring a dedicated chief compliance officer, you're going to have less time to focus on these administrative functions. So taking time to prioritize that early in the business, get those processes in place the same way you would for your financial planning or investment process. Just compliance is another administrative element of this. But prioritizing that early on, and just kind of whether it's seeking out us as consultants for support with that, or doing some research online if you're a DIY focused individual, to kind of put those pieces together, simplify it, understand the practical application of it. That way you're not having to rebuild this during an audit.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Shelby, what do you think?
I'm not going to say something different. I'm going to echo that sentiment, maybe just add to it a little. I had a colleague tell me one time, if you have to get prepared for an audit, you're not prepared for an audit. So I think spending that time up front to design the program, work a little harder at the get-go so that it runs itself for the most part and just runs a little more smoothly as time goes on. You know, creating a calendar for yourself, again, that you're going to adhere to and that's not asking for too much of you so that you're bound to ignore alerts. Doing all that to begin with is going to be a lot easier than backtracking later down the road.
Perfect. So start early and stay consistent is what I'm hearing.
I like it. Yes, good summary.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much. I think we got a lot of great content today. For anyone that wants to hear more about XYPN membership, we're going to post a link in the chat so you can register for a call with one of our success strategists. They can tell you all about our compliance offerings and what membership means. And then also don't forget to fill out that survey that will be posted when you exit this webinar and tell us how we did. So thank you both again so much. I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Bye, guys.